Good afternoon, everyone. How's everybody doing today? Pretty good, pretty good. Thumbs up, smiling faces. Good, all right. So, today's class, this will be one of the few times that I probably do a lot of the talking. Um, but I'll, of course, check in with you guys periodically. Today's class is mostly kind of designed to give you a framework. Like, what are you getting yourself into? Like, what is the study of philosophy and what does it mean? And as an extension of that, how is it, what is the study of ethics and what does that mean? What are other areas of inquiry that the discipline of philosophy investigates? How do philosophers do philosophy? Like, what is their methods and methodologies for doing so? It's a different way of thinking. Um, as a discipline, it's not too prominent anymore. Um, it's kind of whenever we think about education these days, it's mostly back in if you think back to like the 1950s or 1960s, education was kind of celebrated for knowledge's sake. Like we're in this together for the sake of knowledge, just for the sake of knowledge. That's kind of what philosophers do. Okay. Anymore, education has kind of, in general, has just kind of taken more of a um, pragmatic approach. Like anymore, if education doesn't lead to some type of vocation or job or something like that, it's being frowned upon. Okay, part of the old model is still here in some respects. I mean, you guys have to. Some of you probably roll your eyes when you have to take certain like general education classes and stuff. Those old models of education are there to kind of help make you like a well-rounded person, like whether it would be thinking about history or politics or the arts, literature, those types of things. So this is kind of the tension point as far as why philosophy has fallen out of favor. And of all the disciplines, it has probably fallen out the most. Okay. Like anymore, even at big universities like West Virginia University, like they might have like 4 or 5 philosophy teachers on staff. Um, the only reason why the only reason why I'm teaching you philosophy is because, frankly, I already had a more practical degree, so to speak, in English. Bluefield State hired me as an English teacher. Then they realized they needed somebody to teach philosophy, so I went back and got another master degree on their dime, right, so that I would be able to teach you this type of class. So this is very much the most unpragmatic of disciplines that you can think of. It's not as bad as basket weaving, okay, but basket weaving is usually the object of scorn for people who propose the model of education that should always be pragmatic. The problem with the pragmatic approach is education is more than just technical stuff. Like, I mean, I'm not bashing anybody who goes a different route in higher education. Like, certainly, there's lots of professions, very noble professions, and hell, for most of them, you can make more money than you would if you were going doing higher education. The problem is, though, and even our founding fathers, people like Thomas Jefferson, they said the founding fathers emphasized if we're going to have a good democracy, we're going to have an educated population. To have a democracy, we need education, even if it's not the most practical of things. Okay. With that said, even though the discipline of philosophy isn't practical per se, it is something that affects us on a daily basis. How do we view the world? How do we perceive the world? How do we think? How do you see through people's deceptions? And we use the study of logic for that, right? All of us ask the big questions in life at some point or the other. What is there beyond just us? Okay, what is there beyond just us? Is the different several different medieval philosophers from the Christian tradition pretty much say everything is just our search for finding God. Right, that's kind of what our quest for knowledge is. It's our search for finding the divine. For our heart, our human nature. The medieval philosophers said, we yearn to know more. There comes a point where some of us are no longer satisfied with just accepting what has been told to us. Even when it comes to something like faith, like maybe you are a person of faith. Sometimes people with faith oftentimes have lapses of faith at points in their life. Like you struggle to believe. For instance, whenever you think of we'll talk about this later in the class. Whenever you think of something like the prominence of evil in the world, like you see all the violence and destruction and the genocides that are taking place in places like the Middle East right now. You see awful things happening to children, like when a child gets cancer and dies, for instance. Oftentimes people even struggle with things like faith in those circumstances. Like, how could a just God allow these things to happen? Well, philosophy is a tool that you can use to answer those big questions. And sometimes, if you do philosophy, even from like a religious perspective, sometimes it's a tool that can help strengthen your faith. But without philosophy, no other discipline would exist. Okay, it all started in the ancient Greek period with philosophy. All the sciences emerged out of philosophy. Mathematics emerged out of philosophy. It is the study of everything. The definition, I'm going to share my screen now for some of these notes I've typed before. Philosophy is, by definition, the love of knowledge. The love of knowledge. The feel that is like a Greek root for knowledge. Then the Sophy part, that is the love. Sophia is a Greek word for love. So love of knowledge. You love to learn things just for the sake of learning things. Knowledge is something you can't ever exhaust. It's something that you can't put it into a cup and have a finite amount of it, right? It's something that we keep collecting, building on forever, right? That's basically what this means. This isn't something you can ever exhaust or complete. Just because you finish a college degree doesn't mean that you stop learning things, right? Life teaches us things. Oftentimes you'll see people who don't study this discipline at like a college level, but are still very much philosophers. People who just have the attitude, you love to learn. You know that you can never fully exhaust and know everything. As we will find out with Socrates next week, Socrates is a guy who lived life in this way. Wisdom is in knowing that you don't know anything. That's kind of like philosophy, Socrates' maxim. So, of all the things you could take, this is not pragmatic. I'll just say that. It is, though. It is, because all of us ask these big questions at some point in our lives. If you don't, if you just kind of go through life sleepwalking, well, some people do that. Some people don't really care about the big questions, but many of us do. So that is kind of the knowledge. I would say that philosophy is not something that you can quite put your finger on. Like, we know what physics is, right? We know what chemistry is. We know what literature is. Even that's kind of up in the air. But philosophy, it's not something that you can quite put your finger on. It's more of an attitude, a way of thinking, than it is a discipline. So whenever when you're trying to fit the pragmatic model of education, and they make you do things like assessment and rubrics, how do you quantify people's knowledge and improvement and stuff? When it comes to philosophy, it puts people like that into, it sends people like that into a headspin, right? Because there's no way that you can really quantify these skills that you learn in this class. So, an attitude, a way of thinking. You just love knowledge for the sake of learning, of loving knowledge. Back in the ancient Greek period, we're not going to read any of the pre-Socratic philosophers, but the ancient Greeks sort of differentiated themselves from other peoples in the ancient world. All kinds of different civilizations thinking about the ancient world. You had the Babylonians, Mesopotamia, right? You had China, India, all these different great civilizations in the ancient world. Certainly, all of them came up with answers about ethics. But a lot of as we'll learn about, I don't think I'm talking about religions in this version of the class. One of the things about the Eastern world, like China and India, the Eastern world kind of combined religion with philosophy, like the way that they go about religion, like Buddhism, for instance. Buddhism is kind of, it's not as abstract and metaphysical as Christianity is. Buddhism is more like a way of living life. Buddhism is kind of a code of ethics, so to speak. Confucianism and Taoism in China is the same kind of thing. So, in certain civilizations, religion and ethics kind of became married together. But in the Western world, if you think about the ancient Greeks and the mythology that they had, that's something we study a lot in World Literature 1. You think about the gods in ancient Greek mythology: Zeus, Poseidon, Athena, Hermes, Ares, so forth and so on. Apollo is always an asshole in Greek mythology, okay? You think about the Greek gods were despicable, right? They almost seem to be the worst as far as always being jealous of each other. Zeus would go around and impregnate human women. um, creating demigods. Like it was very rapey a lot of the time. They're always scheming and plotting against humans or using humans as their playthings. When you think about the Greeks, in that system, do you want to model yourself after the Greek gods? No. No, they're not really good role models. So, the Western world, some of these first philosophers like Thales, Parmenides, Heraclitus, and Pythagoras, these are guys who said, you know what? If we're going to explain things, some of life's biggest questions, we shouldn't use religion to do it. We should just kind of observe the world around us, see what's going on, come up with some ideas like how does the world work? What is the nature of reality? How does this world tick at its core? These were some questions that some of these names, like Thales, Parmenides, Heraclitus, and Pythagoras, were after. Let's see. I'm going to give you an example of Pythagoras and I'm going to talk about Parmenides and Heraclitus, and I'll also talk about Pythagoras here. Thales was the first. But to kind of give you an idea of some of the questions that they were asking, like how does the world work? What is reality? They tried to explain really big concepts. Parmenides pretty much came up with this idea about change. A lot of the things that they were kind of asking, what is the nature of change? How do we get from point A to point B? Like how do we, whenever we think about something like the seasons, how do the seasons change? How do we go from summer to autumn or autumn to winter? Whenever we think about, they would observe things like insects. They would see sort of a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. They ask these questions like, what is the nature of change? How do we perceive change? What is real? What isn't? Some of these guys came up with some pretty wild answers. Parmenides pretty much came up with the answer that change is everything is an illusion. Okay, nothing ever changes. Everything is just an illusion. We're kind of like somebody who is dreaming, or we go through our whole life dreaming. Everything isn't real. The world around us is just an illusion. You can kind of think about how some types of media have, even science fiction and stuff, has portrayed this idea. Think about something like the Matrix. Everything in the Matrix is an illusion. Like none of it is real. Compare that to Heraclitus. Heraclitus had this famous maxim: you can't step into the same river twice. You can't step into the same river twice. He came up with the idea everything is change. We're always in a constant state of change. No, we are never not changing in some way. Everything is changed. Nothing is static. If you think about like how our bodies work, our cells are constantly destroying themselves and rebuilding themselves. Or even at the bodily level, we're constantly going through a state of change. So these are the questions these guys asked. None of this necessarily has to do with ethics, but the first philosophers were asking these giant questions. Like what is real in our experience? what is reality? What is illusion? How do we explain all change in the world and how change is occurring? I think Thales argued. I need to brush up on these guys, but I think Thales argued everything is related to water. Okay, Pythagoras. You might have heard of Pythagoras in math class because of the Pythagorean theorem. Pythagoras pretty much tried to explain. You can show how change and all this stuff works through mathematics. Pythagoras even kind of explained how beauty is mathematical. Whenever we think about something like music, good music in many ways is mathematical, and like how it works and how it functions. So all these guys kind of had it. All these guys, I'm not expecting you to remember much of this stuff. I'm just going over it just to kind of show you. All these guys explained this stuff. They came up with these theories. They weren't necessarily scientific theories. They were like pseudo-scientific theories. They observed the world. They got curious about the world. They tried to explain the world in their own limited ways. These guys had no tools available to them. They didn't have much of a foundation of knowledge to build upon. These are the guys who kind of started it. They started this whole enterprise of knowledge and curiosity. Think about how far we have come since some of these guys. I think of all the pre-Socratic guys, I think Heraclitus came closest. Parmenides, nothing is real, it's all a dream, and all this stuff. I never really bought that. But he came up with that idea because he thought that we were all one being. Like we're all one. Like think about it. His idea was we're pretty much one divine being, and we're all just little parts of the same being, and that's why he explained no change is real. Because if you only have one being, then how can change occur? He pretty much said we're all God. That's pretty much what Parmenides said. So these guys are the foundation. But the study, when this really became an attitude and a discipline, is when Socrates started asking a lot of big questions in ancient Athens. He founded this school called the Academy, and Socrates just was a guy who wanted to invoke this attitude, this curiosity. Do not accept anything without asking tons of questions first. Don't settle for any answers that you haven't yourself exhausted. Socrates was all about this attitude. And from this kind of attitude came Plato, came Aristotle, and pretty much everything else that you ever, I don't care if you're studying biology or physics or ethics or logic, pretty much everything started with those two guys, Plato and Aristotle. Socrates was kind of the guy who gave them the push. Plato and Aristotle were two of the guys who tried to explain everything. Okay? All of knowledge, they say, owes a footnote to Plato. I think Aristotle too. These guys came up with such vast explanations of everything that even like when things like Christianity came to be, Plato and Aristotle were writing 300 or 400 years before Christ was born. And whenever you think of something like Christianity, there's so much Plato in it. There's so much Aristotle in it. Maybe not necessarily if you look at the Gospels, but if you look at things like St. Paul's letters, it's full of Plato. It's full of Aristotle. So things that we'll talk about more in the coming weeks. So philosophy, again, it's an attitude. You want to learn. You don't want to accept anything without putting it through investigation first. It's an important thing. Think about all the people today who don't do that, right? Who think about all the people who sit and watch. I don't care if you're left or right or whatever, right? Think about all the people who sit and watch news all day, get fed ideology. You never question it. You just kind of accept it for what it is. Philosophy is the pushback against that. So when it comes to ethics, I talked about this a little bit the other day. We'll talk more about it now. Ethics, whenever people start taking a class like this, you think to yourself, ethics, it's a code. It's a code of conduct lots of times. Lawyers do not reveal anything your client has said. Even if your client is guilty as hell, if you're a defense attorney, right, you still have to defend them. I don't care how reprehensible or icky you feel about them. It's your code of conduct to give them a fair trial. Even if you have to lie in doing it, right? Not lying when it comes to something like perjury, but even if you kind of have to make a case, okay? Whenever you think about something like a psychiatrist or a medical doctor, those medical records are confidential. You can't divulge anything to anybody from the outside. A lot of people right now are talking about Mitch McConnell, right? Mitch McConnell, is he dead or not? The famous senator from Kentucky, right? Whether or not he is dead or it's a cover-up or whatever, the fact is none of the doctors would be allowed to even say, because it's doctor and patient confidentiality. These are different rules and codes of conduct that people follow. When it comes to healthcare ethics tends to kind of take this approach, like rule books, things you can or can't do. For instance, Catholic hospitals have this whole rule book called the ERDS, ERDS, which is these rules, codes of conduct for which to conduct medicine. And we have a Catholic hospital in the state, CAMC in Charleston is one example. But that's not what we do in a philosophy class. We do a little bit of it. This class, it's all about good living. How do you live the good life? How do we live a fulfilling life? At the end of the day, when we're close to dying, right, do you really want to have regrets? You want to kind of look back at your life and think, okay, I lived life the right way. It is good living. How do we get there? That's something that's been debated for millennia, and there's no clear-cut answers on it. But nonetheless, we try, and that is kind of what the study of ethics is about. Ethics, this is a distinction I want to make too. Ethics and morality are closely related to each other, but they're also kind of different. One of the readings that I'm giving you for early next week is from a theology book, Introducing Moral Theology. But I gave you that chapter just because it goes into this distinction more. Morality is pretty much that kind of code of conduct. Ethics is more of an attitude of right living. One of the things the reading does is it contrasts the Ten Commandments with the Beatitudes. Okay, so whenever we'll actually study the Beatitudes later in the class more. Whenever you think of something like the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, you should respect your father and your mother, you shall not covet, all these different commandments. That is morality, right? That's kind of like a more of a code. This is something you should not do. Ethics, on the other hand, is more of a here's how it's more than just we shouldn't do it. It's how can we put these principles into practice and actually live a good life in doing so. We question why we shouldn't do those things, and then we kind of develop our character around it. That's kind of like more of what ethics is interested in. It's not a rule book, you shall not do these things. It's more of you're trying your best and you have an attitude that you want to live rightly, not just because it's an obligation. The chapter goes into this distinction. You'll read it for next Tuesday. The chapter goes into this distinction between a morality of obligation versus a morality of happiness. Think about it. Think about all the things that you might do. I'll even ask you guys, we'll stop for a minute, the lecture, and I'll even ask you guys, think about all the things that you do just because you have to do them. It's like an obligation that you have. Versus things that you do because you want to do them. There's a big difference there. This is something that my wife is actually she was an elementary school teacher. She's going back to school this year. She was an elementary school teacher. It's something that she used to see every day in kindergarten. Do you follow the rules because you have to, or do you follow the rules because it's just right to do so? Do you follow the rules because it will make you happy to follow the rules? There's a big distinction there. And morality is more interested in the obligation. Ethics is more interested in the happiness aspect. I'll give you an example of how this works. I'm a Catholic. I approach the study of philosophy very much from a religious lens. Okay, but for instance, in the Catholic Church, the church teaches that you should go to Mass at least once a week on the weekends. If you don't, it's a mortal sin, and you should probably go to confession if you skip for no good reason. Well, they put that rule in place because they think, okay, if you go to Mass, you do your due diligence to God, that'll make you happy. But does that make you? But people who do so because they think they're going to be breaking a rule and they'll go to hell. Is that really the right attitude about how to approach it? Or should you go because you want to go, not just because you think there'll be consequences if you don't go? There's a big difference there in how you think about the world. Can you guys think of any examples? Any of you want to chime in? Any of you guys think of any examples of something that you might do just because you have to versus something that you do because you actually want to? Maybe even some of you guys are parents and might have kids and you've seen kids do this stuff. Anybody want to share some anecdotes?
I think sometimes people choose jobs that feel safe and feel like the safe bet. Or maybe their family has generationally had a job that they want their child to go into. And then I think some people choose what makes them happy despite money, despite anything like that. I've had some instances like that in my family.
So, can you give an example, Lakin? Can you give an example of the latter? Like maybe somebody who just chose to do what made them happy?
Um, they seem to live a longer, healthier life, and they're just a well rounded person. There's a difference for sure. Yep.
Right. And usually, when somebody studies some of the things I talked about at the beginning, the unpragmatic things, right? Oftentimes, we'll study these things like philosophy, just because it makes you happy to do so. Um, yeah, that's an example of the difference. Um, what about some of the rest of you all? Any other examples? Maybe like you see you have done things because you have to versus you want to, or maybe you've seen it in children or anything like that. Yeah, I wish Courtney was on the call because she could probably tell you a ton of stories. Like like she's had like kids punch other kids, and then she'll be like, "Why'd you do that?" I just felt like it, right? She's like, "Yeah, I think you should make some good choices. Don't do that. That's not going to make anybody happy. That makes everybody miserable." Um, Kids are funny and how they oftentimes view morality and ethics. Um, Anything they can get away with, they will try to. Okay. So this is something we'll revisit next class when you do that reading, because all the reading next time, there's a story called The Ring of Gyges by Plato. Plato pretty much came up with this thought experiment. What if you think about like Lord of the Rings, right? Bilbo and Frodo had the ring of power. When they wore it, they could turn invisible. If you could turn invisible, think about all the stuff you could get away with. Okay, what might you try to get away with if you had a ring that made you invisible? Maybe you wouldn't do anything, but some people would try to get away with everything. That's kind of the thought experiment that we'll be dealing with next Monday. Um, is we'll be putting this morality of obligation and happiness thing to the test. So keep this in the back of your mind as we go into next week, because this will be the object of discussion. But that is pretty much what ethics is after: the good life, good living. Um, I guess you can some you could probably say stuff like self help books and things like that, or an offshoot of ethics in some respect. Um, but it extends just beyond the personal level. How can we all be happy? Like, how can we construct governments and policies that'll make us happy versus miserable? All these different schools of philosophy connect to each other. So, whenever we study something like ethics, you can't study it in isolation from these other things. To give you guys a few more examples, um, the philosophy of nature, that's a whole thing. Kind of what I was explaining with the pre-Socratics. How do we explain things like change? How do we explain motion? How do we explain a lot of these different things? The philosophy of nature as a discipline is very interested in that. Okay. The sciences kind of sprang from this idea of the philosophy of nature. Again, the difference between science and philosophy is just more of an attitude. These were guys and ladies who were curious about the natural world, observed all these things, and over time they crystallized into these different disciplines like physics or biology. These different disciplines developed their own methods for which to study it. Philosophy is you're interested in the subjects, but you're not constrained to a certain method in investigating it. Epistemology. This is a fun one. The study of knowledge. How do we know things, right? How do we know things? What is true? What is not true? What is a fact? What is fiction? This is something that is being tested a lot these days, right? Just because we always hear something like that's fake news or something, right? We hear that from Trump a lot, right? That's fake news. Maybe it isn't. How do we come up with knowledge? Do we truly know anything, or is knowledge an illusion? How do we know we're not in the Matrix? Like the Matrix is one of the most philosophical movies ever. Okay, how do we know we're not in a Matrix? How do we know we're not in a computer simulation? Okay. How do we know we're not just NPCs in a video game? How do we come up with certainty about the world? These are the kinds of questions that the study of epistemology asks. Just for an example, the philosopher Rene Descartes in the 1500s. If you guys ever did those math class where you had the coordinate planes, a-axis, y-axis, doing slopes and stuff like that, you can thank Descartes for that, okay, for putting you through that pain. But Descartes kind of asked this question: how do we know anything is real? How do we know we're not being influenced by an evil deceiver? He boiled it down to, we know because we eventually ask we can eventually boil it all down to one question, one point. We are able to think, therefore we are. I think, therefore I am. That was his answer for explaining. This is why everything is, even if everything else is false, we know what we are thinking creatures. We can build a philosophy off of that. So throughout the course, for instance, next week when I explain Plato for the first time, I will first explain what his epistemology is. How do we know things? What is real? What is an illusion? And from that, I will kind of build, here's how his ethics builds off of that. So you really can't explain Plato's ethics without thinking, how did he construct his epistemology first? Eventually, I would like to teach a whole class just on epistemology. I think that would be fun. Maybe for an upper level humanity English major class. Logic is the tool that philosophers use to make sense of everything. Logic is our investigation procedure. This is kind of our methodology for breaking down the world and thinking about it. Within logic, you have, of course, rhetoric as an offshoot. Rhetoric is the art of persuasion, and it uses logic as one of the tools for persuasion. But mostly in the discipline of philosophy, we kind of are very mathematical in how we approach knowledge constructive. We're very deductive in our methods. Whenever we think of, like, this is a classic syllogism, philosophers love to use syllogisms. These syllogisms are 100% mathematically certain. The famous one, all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. I color coded it there to kind of give you an example of why this is airtight logic. The yellow, so just even with the colors, yellow equals green, blue equals yellow, therefore blue equals green. This is called a syllogism. Philosophers kind of like to build knowledge off of these, in using these kinds of methods and tools. These are like this is word math, word logic. These are the things that we have traditionally done. But eventually it hits a wall, and that's when we move into inductive reasoning, which is science, the scientific method. You can't prove things with 100% certainty, but you can certainly prove them up to a certain percent. And even whenever you think about something like the laws of science, think about something like gravity. Okay. Gravity is something we would take as 100% certain. If I pick this pen up and drop it, I know it's going to drop. But it's not 100% certain. Nobody's ever tested gravity like a billion times in a row, right? Think about that. I sound a little crazy when I say that, but just think about all the different times in history where people have thought of something as a fact one day and it's almost disproven the next. The earth revolves around, the sun revolves around the earth. That's what they thought in the medieval days, in the ancient days. Copernicus found out it was the opposite. The sun, with its intense gravity, means that the earth revolves around it. He ticked a lot of people off when he said that, mostly the church, because Genesis says that man is created in God's image. The earth is created around man. Man is the steward of the earth. Therefore, if the earth just revolves around the sun, is it a planet like any other, like Jupiter or Saturn or Venus? That kind of diminishes their importance in the cosmos. So the church thought that was heretical. They actually waited until Copernicus actually waited until he was dead before he allowed his findings to be published, because he knew he would probably be jailed and persecuted for it. There's an example, a case where something was true one day and wasn't the next. Induction is more of a tool that scientists use. Philosophers are more interested in deduction. This is our toolbox, so to speak, about how we investigate all these other things: ethics, epistemology, the philosophy of nature, and the other ones I'm getting ready to discuss. Political philosophy, it's almost an offshoot of ethics. The study of politics and government. How can government help or hinder someone into living a good life? Like, what is the best form of government? These are all questions that they started debating in the ancient Greek world. We're going to talk next week about Socrates. And Plato was who wrote all the accounts of what happened to Socrates. Socrates was put to death in an unjust way. It was very much kind of an oligarchy. But the people who persecuted him were elected. From that, Plato kind of distrusted democracy. He thought that democracy was the tyranny of the majority, right? If you have more people are stupid than smart, are you really going to let all the stupid people decide who's going to be in power? They're probably just going to elect another stupid person. Plato distrusted democracy, okay? But the whole study of philosophy and government, the political philosophy is all about this. How can we organize ourselves in a way that will be the happiest? Machiavelli later in the class is interested in that question. Should we have more freedom, even like liberty, even when we think about people in charge of us? Is it better to be feared or loved? That's what political philosophy is all about. Again, if you've ever taken something like political science uses more scientific methods for investigating politics. They're very interested in data and things like that. Political philosophers are more interested in asking the big questions more so than studying it meticulously like it's a science. We're more abstract. They're more grounded. Okay. We're up in the clouds. The philosophers are always up in the clouds. Aesthetics is also an important one, and it also relates to ethics and living the good life. And it is the study of beauty. What makes something beautiful? Whether it's a human being, whether it's an artwork, a piece of literature, nature. What makes something beautiful? Is art beautiful or valuable? Talk about something not very pragmatic these days. Even thinking about stuff like AI art today, AI writing. It might be polished and it might not have grammar errors and stuff like that, but you lose some of the beauty of like what makes life worth living whenever you construct art in that way, arguably. Beauty is something we all strive for. It's something we can't get enough of. We're looking. Life is beautiful in many ways. I'm a literature professor as well as a philosopher, right? So obviously, I'm very influenced by aesthetics. What makes a poem beautiful, right? What makes a piece of art beautiful? Oftentimes they say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Beauty is subjective. Maybe so, maybe it's not. These are things that the study of aesthetics are after. Sometimes aesthetics will creep into ethics, but it is its own thing. And the most abstract, talk about when you get so far up in the clouds that you're almost in outer space, okay? The most abstract discipline of philosophy, which so happens to be my favorite, go figure. I always like to joke that I'm like whenever like conservative politicians make a caricature of useless educators, I'm probably like what they most fear most, right? Just because I study stuff that isn't practical at all. The most abstract, but arguably the most important, is metaphysics. Metaphysics literally means beyond physics. What are things that the sciences just can't explain? Maybe religion can explain some of this stuff, but not science. But nonetheless, these are all very important things to think about and discern. For instance, the study of good and evil. How how did evil even come to be in the first place? What is evil's potency in the world? Is evil just as powerful as good? Is good more powerful than evil? How did evil even emerge? Certainly, religion discusses these questions, but science cannot answer these questions. So these are some of the most important questions we can think about. We will discuss some of this in this class at periods. What about time? Think about it. Think about how time is such a weird concept. How do we come up with even things like time? Is time even real, or is it just a concept? Think about like right now, for instance, in the government, they're debating whether or not to throw out daylight savings time. Well, how can you just throw out daylight savings time? Like, you can, right? Arguably, because time is just a weird concept that we come up with more than it is a tangible thing. I know when back in March, I went to Phoenix for a conference, and Arizona is technically just 2 hours behind us. They should be in Mountain Time, not Western Time. But Arizona chooses not to observe a daylight savings time. So when I was out there in March, daylight savings time hadn't kicked in yet. So they were technically 3 hours behind when they should have been 2. Just because they decided we're not going to observe this. I was like, well, I got out there thinking, I set my watch to 2 hours backwards. Really, it was 3 hours because of the weird way they chose to observe it. I'm like, well, next time I go to Arizona again, I'll remember. But metaphysics is all about studying stuff like that too. The nature of space and time. How do we even come to be? What is the nature of our existence? What are we here on earth to do? These are the biggest of questions. What is the purpose of life? Like, what is the nature of being as beings? Do we have rights just because we exist? That's metaphysics. These are some of the biggest, most abstractive questions that you just can't answer in science. But these are some of the most important questions you'll ever ask yourself. So my goal for this class was to introduce all this stuff, and probably part of the goal of the class was to leave your mind fried in a little bit, thinking, "Oh God, what am I getting myself into?" Okay. All I would say is just go along on the ride, right? Enjoy the ride, enjoy the journey. We'll see where the destination ends up, whether you think it was a worthwhile experience or not. It's a different way of thinking. And that's kind of what I wanted to instill in this class today. For most of you guys, pretty much all of you guys in here, except for maybe a couple, are in the sciences in some respect, and you're used to thinking about the world in these concrete ways. This class will give you a different way to think, which I think is a worthwhile experience, if nothing else. So next week, next Monday, then I gave you the Ring of Gyges and the theology reading. And next Wednesday, we will look at Socrates. So that's kind of what we will be doing next week. So we're going to start to get into the specifics next week in particular. Don't forget, this week to do your first day discussion thing that I asked you to do, where you use Google Docs in doing it. Take that AI quiz as well over the weekend before Monday. Next Monday, I will come to my office. I'll look at the who turned it in and stuff, and then I'll click to verify that you are taking the course. Because after a certain point, if you're not verified in taking the course, the university drops you out of the course. Okay, make sure you get those assignments in, those first 2 little minor assignments in this weekend. How you guys feeling? You feeling good? You feeling overwhelmed? How you feel? Thinking all shit, right? Is that what you're thinking? I see a smile there, Anna. Are you thinking all shit? Is that what you're thinking?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I've taken these classes in the past, but I'm so far behind on any schooling type stuff that I'm just jumping back in. And I was just added, so I actually missed the first class. I'm assuming that the 2 assignments you're talking about are both in Moodle.
Yeah, they're in Moodle, and plus the recording of the first class is up. So if you need to look at any specifics, you can always see that recording, or you can always ask me to.
Okay.
Yeah, I have some directions and videos about how to use Google Docs and stuff up on there. Well, welcome, Anna. Welcome to the class since you're new. There's a couple of new people here today. Anna and Jacob wasn't here last time. Jacob's one of my English majors. He's like all the rest of you guys are pragmatic. Jacob's like me. He's the unpragmatic one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's actually I'll let you guys go in a second. That's actually a falsity. Like, you can get good jobs with stuff like an English degree and a philosophy degree. Philosophy majors actually have the highest test scores for entry into law school. Fun fact. So, it might be abstract, but you do develop some good skills out of it. Well, if I didn't scare you, whether you're like, heck no, I'm dropping this class, I will see you all again next Monday. Okay, so have a great weekend.